What if I told you that for centuries, being clean was considered dangerous, not just inconvenient, but a reckless act that could invite death into your home? This isn't a story about ignorance, it's a story about survival in medieval England, a time when staying alive often meant staying dirty. Imagine waking up on a frozen morning, there's no hot shower, no steamy bath. Immersing your body in warm water was seen as an open invitation to disaster. The medical experts of the day believed that heat opened the pores of your skin, and pores weren't just tiny openings, they were breaches in your body's defenses. In a world stalked by plague and disease, illness was thought to travel through the air, carried by something they called miasma. It didn't knock on your door. It simply drifted in, and warm water, they believed, was like unlocking the door and welcoming the killer inside. So, people found ways to wash without really washing. A small bowl of cold water, a rough piece of linen cloth, and a quick wipe of the face and hands. For most people, that was the entire daily routine. Inside their homes, floors were covered with straw, often left unchanged for months, accumulating dirt, food scraps, and waste. People lived inside layers of unwashed clothes and unwashed skin. But this layer of grime wasn't seen as filth. It was seen as armor, a physical barrier between their flesh and the invisible diseases floating in the air. For the wealthy, however, there was a clever loophole. It wasn't about water, it was about linen. The rich wore high-quality white linen undergarments. They believed this fabric had special properties, that it could absorb sweat, toxins, and impurities directly from the skin. So, to cleanse the body, you didn't need a bath, you just needed to change your shirt. A nobleman might change his linen undergarments several times a day, believing himself perfectly clean. The crisp, white edge of a linen collar or cuff peeking out from their outer garments became a public symbol of status. It announced to the world that you were wealthy enough to stay clean without ever touching water. It was the great illusion of medieval hygiene. But this illusion didn't extend to dental care. There were no toothbrushes, no minty toothpaste. People cleaned their teeth by rubbing them with a cloth dipped in abrasive substances like crushed salt, powdered bone, or certain herbs. They scraped their teeth. They didn't brush them. When decay set in, it was often blamed on tiny worms living inside the tooth, and when the pain became unbearable, there was no gentle treatment. You'd visit the barber surgeon. He'd pull out a pair of metal pliers, and with no anesthesia, he would simply rip the tooth out. It's no wonder that in portraits from this era, people rarely smiled. The very air you breathed told the story of the age. It didn't smell of soap or shampoo, it smelled of desperation. People drenched themselves in musk, rosewater, and heavy spices. But this wasn't about attraction, it was about concealment. Perfume was camouflage, a fragrant mask to hide the biological reality of unwashed bodies living, working, and sleeping. Even the mighty stone castles offered no escape. The toilet, politely called a garderobe, was little more than a stone bench with a hole in it, built into the castle's outer wall. Waste simply dropped down into a pit or the moat below. No flushing, no water, only gravity. In the heat of summer, the stench rising from these pits could be so overpowering it would make your eyes water. Yet, even this horror had a strange, secondary purpose. Nobles would often hang their expensive woolen garments inside these toilet shafts. The strong ammonia fumes from the decomposing waste were surprisingly effective at killing lice, fleas, and moths. The toilet doubled as a crude fumigation chamber. If you think life in a castle was bad, the cities were far worse. People would empty their waste buckets directly into the streets. Open sewers, little more than ditches, ran between the houses, and backyard pits constantly overflowed. Keeping cities from drowning in their own filth was a job for a special kind of worker, men who operated only under the cover of darkness. They were called gong farmers. Their job was to climb down into the cesspits, often wading waist-deep in human waste, and shovel it out by hand into carts. It was one of the most dangerous jobs imaginable. The toxic gases at the bottom of a pit could suffocate a man in seconds. Many went down and never came back up. These brave, forgotten men were the invisible foundation of urban survival. During the day, street cleaning was largely left to animals. Pigs roamed freely through the city streets, acting as living garbage disposals, consuming discarded food and anything else they could find. But of course, they left their own filth behind, adding yet another layer to the sludge that coated every street. The smell of a medieval city wasn't just an odor, it was a physical presence, a thick, inescapable mix of rotting straw, animal dung, and the sharp chemical smells from industries like tanning, where leather was processed using vats of urine. You didn't just see a medieval city, you inhaled it. This brings us to a question modern minds can't help but ask. Without toilet paper, what did they do? The wealthy used scraps of cloth, which could be washed and reused, but for everyone else, the answer was whatever nature provided. Leaves, moss, hay, or straw. It was abrasive, uncomfortable, and not very effective. Hands were rarely properly cleaned afterwards, which meant parasites spread with terrifying ease. In fact, archaeological evidence shows that most medieval adults carried intestinal worms. These silent passengers lived inside their bodies, stealing precious calories in a world where food was already scarce. It was a biological tax everyone had to pay just to survive. And yet, if we judge these people solely by their standards of cleanliness, we miss the entire point. They were not weak, they were not lazy. Their immune systems were forged in a crucible of constant exposure, battling bacterial loads that would send a modern person to the hospital in days. They fought back with the knowledge they had. Herbal remedies, the antiseptic properties of vinegar and alcohol, and wisdom passed down through generations. They weren't dirty by choice. They were dirty because they were constrained by the brutal limits of their time, trapped by a scientific understanding that made their best defense against disease a layer of grime. So when we look back at medieval England, we shouldn't just see the lack of showers or the smell of the streets. We should see a civilization fighting for its life. A people struggling to maintain dignity against overwhelming biological chaos. This wasn't a history of filth, it was a history of endurance. For them, cleanliness wasn't about comfort, it was a battle, and every single day survival had to be earned. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past fascinating, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from history.